What would you do if you entered a hotel room and found it so impeccably clean that it felt like no one had ever stayed there, only to discover a secret hidden in the bathroom drain that would trigger a citywide manhunt? In the world of high-stakes investigations, sometimes the most terrifying evidence isn't what's left behind, but what has been meticulously scrubbed away. On the 3rd of May 2014, the Thantong Hotel in the Panyu district of Guangzhou was operating at peak capacity, bustling with travelers enjoying the final days of the May holidays. Amidst the holiday rush, Chu Feng, a seasoned housekeeper nearing 50, began her routine shift. When she entered room 316 at noon, she expected the usual post-checkout chaos. Instead, she was met with an eerie, clinical neatness. The bed was perfectly made, and every surface was wiped down as if the previous guest, 28-year-old Yang Ziqing, was an obsessively tidy traveler. However, this facade of order crumbled the moment Chu Feng stepped into the bathroom. A pool of stagnant water covered the floor, indicating a severe blockage. Following her years of experience, she used a professional drain-clearing tool to remove what she assumed would be a simple clump of hair. Instead, she pulled out several fragments of a mysterious, yellow, sponge-like substance. As the drain cleared, a nauseating, metallic stench filled the air. Upon closer inspection, Chu Feng realized with horror that these were not kitchen scraps or animal remains. They were unmistakable pieces of human fat and muscle tissue.
Police,
Panicked,
help! Somebody
she fled
call
to the
the
lobby,
police!
her screams for the police
Police!
shattering the hotel's
Police!
holiday atmosphere.
Help!
The
Help
severity
me!
of the
Call
situation drew
security!
Officer Lai Min, a
警察，
veteran
所有
criminal
人待在原地。
investigator known for his sharp
发生什么事了？
intuition,
封
to
锁
the
现场，
scene
拉起警
immediately.
线。是，
One
队
look
长。
at the golden yellow tissue confirmed his
检
worst
查所有
fears.
出口。
Room 316 had been used as a site for a grisly dismemberment. Li Min ordered an immediate lockdown of the hotel to preserve the integrity of the evidence. A systematic search of the floor led to another chilling find, a heavy trash bag tucked behind the rear staircase containing smaller fragments of flesh and bone. Every piece of evidence pointed toward the registered guest, Yang Ziqing, whose family confirmed they had lost all contact with her days prior. As the forensic teams began their grim task of cataloging the remains, Li Min turned his attention to the hotel's digital archives. The forensic confirmation that the remains belonged to Yang Ziqing was only the beginning of a much deeper horror, leading investigators to wonder who could have committed such a professional and cold-blooded act in total silence. The ghost in the surveillance footage. As the police tape went up and the forensics team began the grisly task of recovery, the silent witnesses of the Thantong Hotel, the CCTV cameras, began to reveal a chilling pattern of behavior. The digital archives held the key to understanding how a vibrant young woman could vanish from a crowded 4-star establishment without a single cry for help. Investigators led by Officer Li Min sat in the dim light of the security room, eyes fixed on the grain of the surveillance footage, ready to trace the final footsteps of Yang Ziqing. The timeline began with absolute clarity. On the evening of the 30th of April 2014, at exactly 9:12 p.m., Yang Ziqing appeared on the hotel's main monitors. She was dressed in a white top and a blue skirt, carrying a brown travel bag that looked relatively light. She appeared calm, checking into room 316 with the demeanor of someone expecting a peaceful stay. Less than 10 minutes later, at 9:21 p.m., she was seen one last time at the reception desk. She requested a second toothbrush, a detail that initially seemed trivial but later became a focal point of the investigation. Why would a woman staying alone need 2 toothbrushes? Was she expecting a guest, or was she already being coerced? After receiving the item, she stepped into the elevator, the doors closed, and Yang Ziqing effectively ceased to exist in the eyes of the public. The investigation took a sinister turn exactly 30 minutes later. At 9:42 p.m., a man appeared in the corridor of the 3rd floor. He was a shadow in the hallway, wearing a deep-set cap and a medical mask that obscured his features entirely. He did not check in at the front desk, nor did he ask for directions. He moved with a predatory sense of purpose directly toward room 316. Security footage confirmed that he entered the room where Yang Ziqing was staying. From that moment on, the room became a black box. No one else entered, and no one left for several hours. This 3-0 minute gap between her arrival and his appearance suggests he was either tailing her or had a prearranged meeting that turned lethal. Forensic analysts later determined that the window of death occurred between 10 p.m. on April 30 and 1 a.m. on May 1. This meant that while the hotel guests around room 316 were sleeping or celebrating the holiday, a violent struggle and a clinical dismemberment were taking place behind a door marked with a "Do Not Disturb" sign. The logistics of what followed revealed a killer of extraordinary patience and chilling resolve. On the morning of May 1, at 10:40 a.m., the masked man exited room 316. He was now carrying 2 bags, the original brown travel bag belonging to Yang Ziqing and a red plastic bag. To a casual observer, he looked like a guest checking out, but the surveillance footage revealed a subtle, terrifying discrepancy. The brown travel bag, which had appeared soft and half empty when Yang Ziqing arrived, was now bulging and rigid. It held a heavy, spherical weight that the police would later hypothesize was the victim's head. The sheer physical change in the bag's shape was a gruesome testament to the state of the woman left behind. The killer did not stop there. He treated the hotel room as his personal workstation for 3 consecutive days. He was seen leaving the hotel on 3 separate occasions to dispose of evidence. On May 1 at 10:40 a.m., on May 2 at 9 a.m., and finally on May 3 at 9 a.m. Each time, he carried bags of varying sizes, moving with such calm indifference that he failed to draw any suspicion from the hotel staff or the hundreds of holiday travelers passing through the lobby. He was hiding in plain sight, blending into the holiday bustle while carrying out the final stages of a horrific crime. He even had the audacity to return to the front desk on the morning of May 3 to officially check out for the room, acting as the final surrogate for the woman he had already destroyed. This created what Li Min called a forensic paradox. The hotel records showed a successful checkout on May 3, yet the medical examiner insisted the victim had been dead for over 60 hours. The killer had used the busy holiday schedule to his advantage, knowing that a "Do Not Disturb" sign and a formal checkout would buy him the time needed to systematically erase Yang Ziqing from the room. His ability to maintain a facade of normalcy while living in a room with a dismembered corpse is a terrifying look into the mind of a professional. However, even the most meticulous killers make mistakes under the pressure of time. While the room was scrubbed clean, the killer struggled with the larger remnants of his crime. During a secondary sweep of the hotel, officers discovered a large trash bag abandoned in a dark corner behind the rear service stairs on the 3rd floor. Inside, they found meat and bone fragments that had been roughly hacked apart. These remains were consistent with the anatomical structure of an adult female. The discovery shifted the focus of the investigation from a missing persons case to a definitive homicide, and the search for the masked man became a race against time. Lehman's team scrutinized the footage of the killer's exits. They noticed that on the final day, May 3, the man left the hotel and headed toward a nearby agricultural market. He was still carrying the red plastic bag, which appeared to hold a long, cylindrical object. The police theorized that this was the victim's missing tibia, the leg bone. The audacity of the killer was breathtaking. He was walking into a crowded public market in broad daylight, carrying a piece of a human being. This wasn't just disposal, it was a brazen act of confidence. The psychological profile of the suspect began to take shape. He wasn't just a killer, he was someone with a specialized knowledge of anatomy. The way the remains were handled suggested he knew exactly where to cut to minimize blood and maximize the efficiency of the dismemberment. This wasn't the work of an impulsive attacker. It was the work of someone used to the sight of blood and the weight of bone. Lehman noted that the cuts were made along the muscle fibers and joints, a technique typically mastered only by surgeons or experienced butchers. This precision allowed him to pack the remains into small, inconspicuous bags without causing the leaks or smells that usually betray such crimes early on. The investigation deep dived into the 5W1H, who, what, where, when, why, and how of the surveillance data. The who was still a masked phantom, but the how was becoming clear. A calculated entry, a swift kill, and a 3-day systematic disposal. The when was anchored by the chilling 9:42 p.m. entry on April 30. The where was the confines of room 316, which forensics revealed had been cleaned with industrial-grade thoroughness. As the investigators traced his path into the labyrinthine alleys of the market, they realized they weren't just looking for a ghost in the footage. They were looking for a professional who was likely still in the city. The contrast between the victim's initial, hopeful entry and the killer's cold, calculated exits highlighted the predator-prey dynamic that had played out within those four walls. Every frame of the CCTV footage was a piece of a puzzle that screamed for justice. The scent of iron and the cold logic of the CCTV timestamps led the investigators to their next clue, far beyond the four-star luxury of the hotel. While the footage identified a suspect, his professional methods and the ease with which he navigated the local market suggested he was no ordinary criminal, but a man who lived a double life in the shadows of the city's meat industry. The hunt moved from the digital screens of the security room to the physical streets of Guangzhou, where the real identity of the masked man waited to be unmasked. The butcher's trail and the market search. The discovery of the phantom in the surveillance footage provided a digital map of the crime, but the physical trail of the killer, Sang Jianxian, led investigators into the heart of the city's most crowded spaces. While the cameras identified a masked figure, his professional methods and the ease with which he navigated the urban sprawl suggested he was no ordinary criminal. He lived a double life in the shadows of the city's meat industry, and the hunt soon moved from the cold, digital screens of the security room to the humid, blood-scented, physical streets of Guangzhou. Zhang Jianshen's escape route from the Tanthong Hotel was as brazen as the murder itself. Instead of fleeing into the dark outskirts of the city, he chose to disappear into the noise. At 10:57 a.m. on May 3, just moments after his final departure from room 316, Zhang was spotted entering a nearby agricultural market. This move was a masterclass in criminal psychology. A killer carrying human remains is usually expected to seek isolation, yet Zhang sought a crowd. In a public market, the sight of a man carrying heavy bags, the smell of raw organic matter, and the presence of sharp tools are all part of the daily rhythm. He didn't just hide, he assimilated. For anyone watching this on a screen, imagine the tension. A man carrying the remains of a human being, walking past grandmothers, buying vegetables, and vendors shouting prices. It is a chilling reminder of how the most horrific crimes can hide behind the mundane. The investigation in the market focused on a specific detail from the CCTV. Zhang had entered with a cylindrical red plastic bag, but emerged 3 minutes later without it. Officer Li Min immediately realized the market wasn't just a hiding spot, it was a disposal site. For 2 grueling hours, police teams sieved through the market's waste, focusing on the specialized recycling bins used for meat scraps and bone fragments. Their persistence paid off when they recovered a heavy red bag. Inside was the missing tibia of Yang Ziqing. The bone had been removed with such anatomical precision, severed at the joints without shattering the shaft, that Li Min's suspicion was confirmed. The killer was someone who knew exactly how to handle bone and muscle. Think about the skill required for that. Most people couldn't even carve a chicken that cleanly, yet this man treated human anatomy like a day at the office. The break in the case came from an unexpected source, a local motorcycle taxi driver. He approached the investigators with a detail that had haunted him since midday on May 3. He had picked up a passenger who, despite the sweltering heat, remained completely covered in a hat and mask. More importantly, the driver noted a thick, overpowering smell of blood clinging to the man. In the close quarters of the motorcycle ride, the scent was inescapable. It was like he had just walked out of a slaughterhouse, the driver later recalled. This mysterious passenger had requested a ride to a remote village named Horrifying, a location known for its vast landfills and transient guest houses. The driver's memory was further jogged by the man's unusual generosity. He had handed over a large bill and told the driver to keep the change, a move designed to end the interaction as quickly as possible. If you're ever in a situation where something feels off, trust your gut, it might just help solve a murder. Li Min immediately dispatched a tactical team to Horrifying. Based on the driver's testimony, they narrowed their search to a small guest house on the edge of the village. The raid was executed with clinical silence. When the officers burst into the room, they found Zhang Jianshen sitting on the edge of the bed. There was no struggle, no frantic attempt to escape. Instead, Zhang looked up with a vacant, almost bored expression. He was a man who seemed to have been waiting for this moment, possessing the cold indifference of someone who had long since detached himself from the morality of his actions. When asked if he knew why they were there, he simply held out his hands for the cuffs. As the handcuffs clicked shut, the dark history of Zhang Jianchen began to emerge. At 35 years old, Zhang was already a seasoned convict with a prior record for theft. However, it was his post-prison employment that provided the vital link to his surgical precision. He had been working as a professional pig butcher. For years, Zhang had spent his days deconstructing carcasses, mastering the structural anatomy of mammals. To him, the transition from the slaughterhouse to room 316 was not a psychological leap, but a simple application of his trade. He viewed the victim not as a human being, but as a technical challenge to be dismantled and dispersed. This level of desensitization is what allowed him to spend 3 days in a hotel room, meticulously working, while guests slept just a few feet away through the thin walls. During the initial interrogation at the station, Zhang remained eerily calm, showing no fear or remorse. He spoke of the murder as one might describe a day of hard labor. When pressed about his connection to Yang Ziqing, he delivered a statement that sent a shiver through the room. "I didn't know her. I was just doing my job for the money." This revelation transformed the investigation. It wasn't a crime of passion or a random act of violence, it was a professional contract. Zhang admitted to disposing of the victim's head and remaining parts in an abandoned well on the outskirts of the city, but he initially refused to name the person who had paid him the bounty. The silence in the interrogation room was heavy. The police knew they had the hitman, but the mastermind was still out there, watching and waiting. The profile of the butcher of room 316 was now complete, but the mystery of the puppet master remained. Zhang Jianchen was the blade, but someone else had swung it. The calm with which he navigated the hotel, the market, and the village guest house was fueled by a cold, transactional logic. He had been hired to make a person disappear, and he had nearly succeeded by using the city's own infrastructure, its hotels, its markets, and its landfills as his accomplices. With the killer in custody, the police began to look closer at the life of Yang Ziqing, expecting to find a motive for her murder, but instead, they unearthed a confession involving another death that had occurred a year prior. Behind the victim's image as a grieving widow lay a dark secret of greed, and the investigators realized that the cycle of hired revenge had started long before anyone stepped into room 316. This case serves as a dark masterclass in the consequences of our actions. If you're finding this deep dive into the darker side of human psychology fascinating, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. We're about to uncover how an illicit affair led to the ultimate betrayal. The real question is, in a game where everyone is a player, who was the first to move? The investigators were about to find out that Yang Ziqing wasn't just a victim, she was an architect of her own demise, and the person who paid Zhang Jianchen was someone she thought she could control. To understand the tragedy of room 316, we have to go back to the death of Yang's husband. At the time, it was ruled a tragic accident, a hit and run that left a family devastated. But with Zhang Jianchen now talking, that accident was revealed to be his first professional job. He had been hired to stage that crash, and the clients were none other than Yang Ziqing and her lover, Sha Qiang. They thought they had gotten away with it, but in the world of hired killers, loyalty only lasts as long as the next payment. The scent of iron and the cold logic of the CCTV timestamps led the investigators to their next clue, far beyond the 4-star luxury of the hotel. The hunt was no longer just about a room in Guangzhou. It was about unmasking a conspiracy that had already claimed 2 lives. Stay tuned, because the final revelation in this case is one you won't see coming. The first victim, a staged accident. Behind the victim's image, as a grieving widow, lay a dark secret of greed, and the investigators soon realized that the cycle of hired revenge had started long before anyone stepped into room 316. The investigation into Yang Ziqing's social circle initially painted a picture of a successful professional woman whose life had been marred by tragedy. Her husband had died just a year prior in what was ruled a tragic hit-and-run accident. Friends and family recalled her deep mourning, but as Zhang Jianxian began to cooperate with the police to seek a more lenient sentence, he shattered this facade with a single, bone-chilling revelation. The accident was his first professional job, and Yang Ziqing was the one who had signed the check. It's a plot twist that sounds like it's straight out of a noir thriller, but for the Guangzhou police, it was a grim reality. If you're finding this unraveling of a double life as shocking as the investigators did, make sure to comment below on what you think drives someone to this level of betrayal. The true backstory of the tragedy was a toxic mixture of vanity and betrayal. Yang Ziqing was a young, beautiful accountant at a state-owned enterprise who had become obsessed with the attention she received from others. Despite having a kind and honest husband who loved her deeply, she found his simple nature dull and insufficient for her rising aspirations. She began an illicit affair with her superior, a 43-year-old man named Xia Qiang, who lured her with promises of wealth, luxury, and a status she felt she deserved. They were partners in crime in every sense of the word. When Yang eventually demanded a divorce to be with Xia, her husband refused. His love for her blinded him to her growing coldness, and he believed they could still fix their marriage. The situation reached a violent breaking point when the husband discovered evidence he couldn't ignore, a recording of Yang's intimate and conspiratorial conversations with Xia Qiang. In a fit of righteous rage, he confronted them and threatened to expose the affair at their workplace. In the rigid structure of a state-owned enterprise, such a scandal would have been catastrophic, effectively ending their careers and social standing in an instant. Pushed into a corner and fearing the loss of her comfortable lifestyle, Yang Ziqing didn't choose to repent. She chose to eliminate. Through Xia Qiang's shady connections in the city's underbelly, they were introduced to Zhang Zhenxian, a man who viewed human life through the cold lens of a butcher. To Zhang, a human body was simply product to be managed. They paid him a staggering bounty of 300,000 yuan, a small fortune in 2013, to stage a fatal car accident. The plan was executed with terrifying simplicity. One evening, as the husband was walking home on a familiar, quiet road, Zhang deliberately steered his vehicle into the man at high speed. He crushed him with enough force to ensure that he would never reach the hospital alive. Zhang then skillfully faked a loss of control, leaving skid marks and debris to make the scene look like a routine traffic mishap caused by a momentary lapse in judgment. In the aftermath, Yang Ziqing played her part with an Oscar-worthy performance. She wept uncontrollably in court, expressed profound heartbreak to her in-laws, and in a move that appeared merciful to the public, she chose not to press for a heavy sentence against the driver. This forgiveness was actually a calculated maneuver to ensure Zhang Zhenxian was released quickly, serving only a short sentence for accidental manslaughter. The hitman was paid, the husband was gone, and the mistress was free. Or so she thought. For a year, Yang and Xia Qiang believed they had successfully buried their secret under a mound of blood and 300,000 yuan. Yang lived as a lonely, sympathetic widow while secretly continuing her relationship with Xia. But here is where the application of reality becomes clear. Secrets that are bought with blood never stay buried. Yang's vanity soon turned into bitter frustration. She grew tired of being a hidden mistress and living in the shadows of Xia Qiang's official family. She demanded that Xia divorce his wife and marry her immediately. When Xia began to pull away, fearing her volatility, Yang resorted to the same weapon that had once been used against her: blackmail. She threatened to go to the police and reveal the truth about her husband's murder, effectively taking Xia down with her. She failed to realize a fundamental rule of the criminal world. Once you show a man that you are willing to kill for your own benefit, you can never expect him to trust you. By threatening a man who had already helped her commit one murder, she was simply placing herself next on the job list. Xie Ting, realizing that his former lover and accomplice had become his greatest liability, once again reached out to the only person he knew could solve the problem with surgical silence. He offered Zhang Zhenxian another 300,000 yuan to make Yang Ziqing vanish. It was a mirror image of her own previous crime. On the 30th of April 2014, Xia Qiang lured her to the Thantong Hotel under the guise of a romantic holiday getaway, a chance to finally discuss their future. When she walked into room 316 and saw Zhang Zhenxian standing there instead of Xie, she didn't scream. She initially thought he was another of Xie's couriers or a guard sent for her protection. She believed she had bought her freedom with her husband's blood, but she had actually only set the timer on her own death. In the world of hired killers, loyalty only lasts as long as the next bank transfer, and Yang Ziqing's own greed had finally come full circle. The very hitman she helped set free became her executioner. Justice in this case didn't come from a courtroom at first. It came from the internal collapse of a conspiracy built on ego and murder. As the investigators listened to Zhang's cold confession, they realized the husband was the only truly innocent party in this entire web of lies. His death, which had been labeled an accident, was finally being vindicated through the brutal murder of his killer's employer. Justice may be slow, but it is certain, and the net of heaven was finally closing in on the conspirators. Yang Ziqing thought she was the one pulling the strings, but in the end, she was just another piece of product for the butcher. If this story teaches us anything, it's that the cost of an illicit gain is always higher than the initial price. Subscribe now to see the final sentencing and the conclusion of this harrowing case. In our next and final part, we see how the law finally brought down Xie Qiang and the butcher of room 316. The inevitable justice, karma in room 316. The cycle of violence ended exactly where it began, with the relentless grip of the law ensuring that no act of cruelty, no matter how professionally executed, goes unpunished. While the conspirators once believed they had successfully navigated a path paved with blood and yuan, the internal collapse of their relationship proved a timeless truth. Evil eventually consumes itself. The final act of this tragedy unfolded with a grim poetic irony that shocked the city of Guangzhou. Xia Qiang, a man who thought he could buy silence and loyalty, became paralyzed by the fear of Yang Ziqing's escalating blackmail. Desperate to protect his reputation and freedom, he turned back to the very man they had both used to eliminate her husband. He authorized a second payment of 300,000 yuan to Zhang Jianxian, effectively treating his former lover like a problematic transaction that simply needed to be closed. On that fateful night of the 30th of April 2014, Yang Ziqing walked into room 316 expecting a secret rendezvous that would finally secure her future as a legal wife. When she saw Zhang Jianxian standing there instead of Xia Qiang, she didn't realize she was looking at her own executioner. She likely felt a fleeting sense of relief, perhaps believing he was there as a messenger or a guard sent to finalize their plans. She spent her final moments performing a mundane task, closing the curtains. It was an act of seeking privacy that only served to hide her own murder from the world outside. Zhang Jianxian acted with the same clinical, detached precision he had honed over years at the slaughterhouse. Using a sharp knife and his knowledge of anatomy, he struck her down before she could even process the ultimate betrayal by the man she had killed for. However, the perfect plan fell apart because of the sheer hubris of the perpetrators. Zhang's terrifying calm as he transported human remains in travel bags over 3 days, and Xia Qiang's arrogant silence were not enough to overcome the investigative grit of Officer Li Min. The butcher's professional precision became his undoing. The way the joints were severed pointed directly to his trade. Following Zhang's cold, transactional confession, police were led to an abandoned well on the outskirts of the city. From those dark, stagnant depths, they recovered the remaining parts of Yang Ziqing, closing the physical chapter of a crime that had been designed to leave no trace. The legal retribution was swift, clinical, and uncompromising. The evidence was overwhelming. The CCTV footage, the driver's testimony, and the recovered remains created a wall of truth that no amount of money could break. Both Zhang Jianxian, the butcher who valued gold over human life, and Xia Qiang, the mastermind who turned on his own accomplice to save his skin, were sentenced to death. In the eyes of the law, there was no mercy for those who had shown none to their own kin and partners. Their partnership in crime ended in a partnership in execution. This harrowing case leaves us with a profound philosophical lesson. Justice is a vast net that catches everyone, eventually. While the conspirators were focused on their immediate, selfish desires, vanity, wealth, and status, they failed to account for the spiritual and legal weight of their own actions. If this story has reached you, let it be a reminder to stay true to your values, because short-term gains through betrayal always carry a long-term cost. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the cases that changed criminal history. The true tragedy of Room 316 lies in the fact that the most innocent person in this